So actually, Terminator Pig, I don't know if there's any cats in this paper. So it is entitled Alliance Between Conifer Trees and an Endophytic Fungi Against Insect Defoliators. So this is what can be considered an unholy alliance between a plant and a fungus to fight off insects that would otherwise feed on them. So that is the crux of this story. So this is research coming out of the University of Alberta, and they show how trees and fungi actually team up against insect attacks. And what's interesting about this is that it's a unique set of plant behaviors that hasn't been observed before.
One is not tethered by earthly limitations.
Bryce sees. We'll see you next time, Bryce. So there is this team up here, and the reason that this team up is important is because it makes them more resilient to infection, both the plants and the fungus. So the endophytes that they're teaming up with, so in this title it's endophytic fungus. So what is an endophyte, Jaded Fairy asks. So endophytes are really small microorganisms that are bacteria and fungi that live in the tissues of the white spruce plant. And they don't do anything bad to the spruce plant. They live there. It's a symbiotic relationship. Everything is good in how they live. And what's really interesting is that they actually produce a toxic byproduct. So as the fungus and the bacteria are undergoing metabolism, they produce toxic chemicals as a metabolic side product that is not toxic to the spruce, but it is toxic to the budworm. Now, Jaded Fairy, avert your eyes if you're scared, but here is the budworm. And so this budworm will end up eating away at the plant, but because the fungus and the bacteria are living together inside of this spruce, right, and producing this, they're going underway their usual metabolic byproduct, and the usual metabolic byproduct is to make this toxin that would kill this worm. And so it fungus in a symbiotic relationship, and the conifer benefits, or does the conifer give back? So the conifer gives back in a way, Neilf, where the conifer is bringing in nutrients into its system. And so the bacteria and the fungi are surviving off those nutrients that are being brought into the plant. They are diverting away resources from the plant so that they themselves can have resources like water and minerals and nutrients, right? But they are given back in that side product of how they're metabolizing it produces this toxin. So it is, in fact, it is a both directions here. So it is symbiotic between all three of the animals or organisms versus it being a parasitic relationship where it would be the fungus and the bacteria just siphoning off energy from themselves and not producing that metabolic byproduct. So it's just it is that working in unison here that is really, really quite unique because it's an example of this bacterium and a fungus helping a plant against an insect. The bark, yeah, that's fair, Terminator Pig. They are interesting in terms of how they look, the bark beetles. Just not good for the actual environment, though. So it's interesting because this fungus, and actually they did identify, Neil, they did molecular testing to figure out what exactly is the byproduct and what exactly was the chemical defense and what they were looking at. So what they actually did, they collected needles from the mature spruce or white spruce and identified the fungi through DNA sequencing. So in this paper, we know that this endophytic body has bacteria and fungus, but they identified that it was the fungi that in particular were the more important of the two items, right? And so what they did was they grew fungi in the lab. In the lab, then they started growing some white spruce seedlings, and they either gave them this, cocktail of fungal and endophytes, or not, and see what changes in those fungal communities altered the tree defense chemistry. So they didn't need to add the bacteria here. They just added the fungus, and upon inoculation, they seeing, okay, what is the protection that these trees now have? How can they protect themselves? Can they protect themselves against these insects? And so what they find is that just the fungi alone help the trees defend against the pest in two particular ways. One is by increasing the tree's natural defenses. They're able to better off fight the insect off using their own hormonal signaling. The salicylic acid that they usually use for, immune priming is better. Now it reacts. It is, I think, really rad, Jaded. So, like, first of all, right, they're able to better upregulate their own immune response. So they boost their own chemical defenses with this fungus, and they actually figured out the small molecule that it was. So it's a small molecule called a terpene. So that is a metabolite in the tree that allows the original chemical defense system to launch. Right? So it's based about this. Neil mentioned if this was like a symbiotic relationship or not. So Neil, this was a brand new hypothesis even. And it's called the plant partnership hypothesis. So it was developed in this study. Before, like, who knows if it was developed before the study started or if it was one where they started doing the study and then they developed it midway through and then they tested it. But basically, the hypothesis guesses for that fungi produce chemicals that makes the plant resistant to more pests, and the exchanges, the fungus benefits from living in the plant, getting its nutrients, and the plant surviving. Right, so it's back to that symbiotic relationship, but the tree friend is going to be critical for this. So, Jay, plants can do a couple of different things upon infection, right? If they are infected by certain stressors, whether it be fungal, insect, herbivorous, whatever, they can respond to it in different ways. So one of the ways, if we have a stressor coming in here, I just do a little lightning bolt as our stressor. So that's the stress. What you end up happening is small molecules get released from the leaf that go upward. And so these are what are called your VOCs. Now, what's interesting, I think, is that these VOCs will actually enter the leaf above. And because they're entering the leaf above, they can actually upregulate and prime this part of the plant that hasn't yet been infected against that infection. Whatever this stressor is. If it's an herbivory attack, it's a fungal infection, a bacterial, doesn't matter. It can actually prime. It releases a chemical cue in the plant. And it can go one of two ways. One is that chemical cue will actually go into the plant and start going throughout the plant. Right? Basically telling the rest of the plant, hey, we're under attack. What also happens is this part, where it gets released by the leaf and becomes a volatile organic compound, or a VOC. And what's really neat is it's faster to release a volatile, and it'll get into the upper leaves faster than by going through the xylem and the phloem within the plant. So it's a way of signaling between yourself that, hey, there's an infection here, and we need you to take care of yourself. And so it's the plant will actually prep against infection, which I think is really, really remarkable. There was this really cool experiment done, Mrs. Spites. The researchers put a fan here. Okay? And this fan started turning, Jay. And as it turned, it started blowing the air. Was okay, these small molecules, which we know get taken in by the leaves above, right, with the fan started fluttering down. And it turns out that this upregulates genes that'll protect the plant. But not only that, it does, Jay, it changes the chromosome structure. So if normally the chromatin is like this, right, it's in a closed state, what ends up happening is regions are opened up, and sometimes you'll even have a polymerase that's sitting on the DNA ready to activate the gene. Yeah, even though they're not being attacked. And, Jay, the way I have it drawn here, it's the same species. It is not. It is not always the same species. It works between species as well. So this is the basis of plant communication, which we can further rabbit hole if you would like. But what I was kind of leading to this, and the point of this, was if you're taking a look at that purple molecule, right? So this one here, that's the volatile that the fungus is releasing, which is also a toxin, right? That kills the worms. I would wonder, and they didn't test this and they hypothesized about it. Does this get detected by a neighboring plant, and does that help it in the future to fight off the worm? Or is it just maybe a priming and it might help them to get ready for it, but it's not the equivalent of protection? Or is it something totally in between? We don't know. A whole forest, possibly. What's unclear, Jay, is if it seems like this plant then does not propagate the signal. So the signal stops from that initial infected plant, and there's probably a radius in which it works. So it's not going to be the whole forest; it's going to be like a particular range. So it's like concentration dependent. Those plants were in two separate pots, right? So there was no root network connecting them. And what's really, really cool is that there was still an upregulation. So it shows that the information that, excuse me, the information that's spread between these plants happens as a function of both the root system as well as the volatile air moving between the plants, which I think is really, really remarkable of a system to be able to function in this way, right? Now, what's really also cool, I think, Jay, is that they swapped the position of these plants. So they took the infected plant and put it... Hold, please. They put it here, so just basically swapping these two. And they still had the air current going like this. When they swapped them, and the air was still going in the same direction, then the uninfected plant didn't change its genetics. Right, so it shows that it really is a small molecule that's going downstream and infecting the next particular site. Does that make sense? So it's a really, really neat take of how the system works. So yeah, there's communication then through both. It is hard sometimes to disentangle the volatiles from the root systems. So like here you can have no root systems involved, but volatiles, yes. But the reverse, when you have the root systems, but then you're trying to contain the volatiles, that can be a really difficult experiment, because you can't have things spreading between the two when it comes to like the various smells. And yeah, that's a much harder part to it. Not good if it's a flying threat that goes against the wind. Yep, exactly. And so, Jay, it's a concentration dependent question. And it's also, it does work between species for both the root systems as well as the volatiles. There is some limiting factor, meaning that if you're evolutionarily distant enough, then it's not going to necessarily happen. But if you're all in the same area of a forest that you've been, cohabitating with that other species for generations and generations, then the likelihood is going to work, because it's called an eavesdropping hypothesis, right? If you put your ear out your window and you hear your neighbor screaming, you're ready. Versus if you put your ear to the window and you don't hear anything, or you're hearing something but you don't know what it means and you don't do anything, right? Then it's of no benefit to anyone. The original hypothesis as to why this even happened was kind of illustrated by the video, where if you have a mother tree and you have saplings around it, if the mother tree gets infected, she can send out this signal that not only helps her, but helps the trees around her, which could be her offspring, right? The saplings. And then